Okay, we've just ticked over 4:30. So in the essence of time and making sure that we've got enough time to answer your questions, we will get started. And I can see that we've got about half of our people who had registered to come are online now. So welcome. My name is Megan Sauzier. I'm the CEO from the WA School Canteen Association. A lot of your names and schools are really familiar to us, so it's so exciting that you could join us today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where I am in the Perth metro area. It's the Whadjuk Noongar people, and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. But I'm aware that we've got lots of regional people online with us today as well. So I acknowledge the traditional owners where you are. Today we're going to be going through the background to where these new standards have come from, why they've been developed and what support tools are available, and what really are the nitty-gritty of the guidelines and what you need to do from a school canteen perspective. We're also going to touch on WASCA support and then answer your questions. To use the chat function, it would be really great if you pose your questions and comments as we go through the session. Amanda, who's online with us as well from WASCA, she's going to be monitoring that, and if there's quick things that she can answer, she'll reply to those. If they're a more in-depth answer or it's something that multiple people want to know about, then we will address it throughout the presentation, either with Henry and Rebecca from the Department of Health or myself, depending on what the question is and when you're asking it. If you see a question in that chat function, you have the same question. You don't need to retype it. You can just click the thumbs up onto that question as well, that question or comment. So we'll know that there's multiple people that want to know about that same topic. The session is being recorded as well, so we're aware that there's quite a few people that wanted to make today's information session but couldn't due to other commitments. So we will be recording it and it will be available via the WASCA website. If you've got other friends or members of your PNC or other members of your canteen that want to know about the information, then you can forward that link onto them as well. So I'll introduce Henry and Rebecca. It's such a privilege to have both of these people here because they're directly from our WA Health Department Environmental Health Directorate. Henry is the Principal Scientific Officer from that group. Henry coordinates the state's foodborne illness reduction strategy, which aims to reduce the rate of human cases of foodborne illness in WA by managing food safety risk from primary production through to consumers. Henry represents the department on the Food Safety Standards Australia and New Zealand National Committee responsible for coordinating the implementation. Rebecca is excuse me, is a Senior Scientific Officer for the Environmental Health Directorate's Food Unit. Rebecca manages the WA Food Act 2008 regulatory reporting, which monitors the performance of food regulatory functions to help ensure consistent and effective implementation of the food regulatory requirements. Rebecca has extensive experience in providing advice and guidance on the interpretation and implementation of the food safety legislation to a variety of stakeholders and has been involved in the development of the guidance materials and communication activities for the new standards. What's really great about these two people is they are experts in the area. And when you look at what they're going to present today around the background, there's a lot of work that's gone into creating the tools and resources to make sure that our canteens feel really well supported in moving forward and implementing the standards. So I'll hand over to Henry and Rebecca to get started.
Thanks, Megan. Hello all. I'm just going to share my screen now. I hope that comes through okay. Thanks for having us. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land. For us, it's the Whadjuk Noongar people of the Noongar Nation, and we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. But before we go on, we'll also like to acknowledge the good work that the schools and canteen staff is doing with running the canteen program. I've got 2 kids myself, and my wife used to be in the PNC for the school, and we do know that a lot of hard work goes into running the school canteen. So thank you for feeding our kids. So this is just an outline of our presentation today. So first I'm going to talk about the background behind the new standards, and Rebecca will talk about the food safety measurement tools, the food handler training component, and also the requirement for food safety supervisors. And I'll jump back on to talk about the record keeping requirements and also the further resources that's been developed. Okay, so why do we need these new standards? So if you can see this table here, this table highlights the statistics for foodborne outbreaks in Australia from 2010 to 2017. I know there's a lot of numbers there, but what we like to highlight here is that outbreaks still happen quite often. And you can see that there's a lot of people who have gotten ill and many more hospitalized as well. And there are deaths associated with these outbreaks. And if we look at the data for Western Australia, so this is the data from 2017 to just last year. And you can see just from this past 6 years that we had 175 foodborne outbreaks. It doesn't get publicized much in the newspaper at all, but these are the data that we're getting. And you can see just from these few years, we had more than 2,000 people getting sick from foodborne outbreaks and around more than 200 hospitalizations associated with it as well. And one common trend we have seen across the years with foodborne outbreaks is that many food businesses get caught out and it only happens once, right? So they can be in operation for many years without incident, then suddenly they get an outbreak. So this shows that, it is just because everything is ticking along fine, it doesn't mean that it will never happen. It doesn't take much for an outbreak to occur. And if we look at the big picture, this is the graph that shows the number of foodborne illness cases in Western Australia. So we have limited it to just Salmonella and Campylobacter infections. There's many more pathogens that can cause foodborne illness, but just with these two pathogens, you can see that last year alone, we have more than 37,000 cases in the community. And this number does not include viral gastro, which will really bump up the numbers. And if you look at the graph there, you can see that the rates remain high over the years, and it is here to stay. So hence, FSANZ, which is Food Standards Australia and New Zealand, have taken up this project to see what else is it that we can do to help bring the case levels down. So this work with the new standards has actually been in motion since year 2000. And there are a lot of projects that has happened since then. And what brought about these new standards is that FSANZ have identified the issues and the sectors implicated with the outbreaks. And they have also assessed the existing regulatory tools to see where are the gaps and what are the new tools that are required. And as part of the process, they have approached various organizations and also industry and also pig industry bodies and also the community to get the feedback on the introduction of the new standards. So that work has been ongoing for the past few years. And these new standards have been formally gazetted just last year, 8th of December. So between now and then, we have 12 months to implement it before it comes into effect on 8th of December this year. Okay, so that's just a very quick background behind how these standards have come to be and the rationale and why is it important that these standards needs to be in place. Okay, with that, I'll hand over to Rebecca to go through the food safety management tools.
Thanks, Henry. Hi, everyone. So I'll just start with an overview of the new standard. So the standard is known as Standard 3.2.2a. It's an extension of the existing food safety standards of the Food Standards Code, and it introduces 3 new tools that need to be implemented by certain food businesses. So these are food handler training, food safety supervisors, and showing that your food is safe, which is done through record keeping. So this new standard, as Henry's mentioned, is going to be implemented by the 8th of December. And so now I'm going to go into more detail on each of these individual tools. Just to start off with, the standard refers to food business categories because certain businesses need to comply with all three of the tools, whereas some lower risk businesses only need to comply with two of the tools. So a category 1 food business is a caterer or a food service business that makes potentially hazardous ready to eat food. And now the term potentially hazardous is essentially it's high risk food. So I've got here some examples of what these foods are. They're foods that they need to be kept refrigerated to keep them safe. So the majority of your cooked meals would contain or be potentially hazardous foods, so high risk. So things that you may be making, things such as sandwiches, sushi, pasta meals, salads, or peeled and cut fruit. Some examples of food that are not potentially hazardous are things like crackers, plain bread and rolls, or raw whole fruit. So going back to the definitions of food business categories, it's those higher risk foods that you're handling and making meals from and serving. So the category 1 businesses then need to comply with all three of the tools. Now, I believe that the majority of school canteens will be category 1 because you're most likely making and serving those meals yourself. But I will cover off category 2 businesses as well. So that is retailers that handle high risk foods, they're potentially hazardous foods. They handle them, but they don't actually make them. They would be, for example, food that is made by another food business and then delivered to your business. And at some point you might handle it unpackaged and then serve it. For example, if you had, say, sushi or sandwiches made by another business and delivered to you, they weren't packaged, but you were then displaying them and selling them, that would be a category 2 business. Now, category 2 businesses only need to comply with the food handler training and the food safety supervisor requirements. But if a business does both category 1 and category 2 activities, then it's always classed according to the highest risk activity. So it will be a category 1 business regardless. I'm required to comply with all of those tools. So this standard applies to all businesses that meet these definitions given here, regardless of the size of the business, the location, how the business operates. There's only one exemption given in the standard, and that is for fundraising events, which are defined as one-off events that are raising money for charity or community nature. So if you were to do a one-off fundraising event selling food, then these tools don't need to be applied for that particular event. But for a business that's sort of, even if the business is doing fundraising as the ongoing activities, but it's sort of operating day to day, then that exemption doesn't apply and the business will need to comply with the standard. So food handler training as the first tool that needs to be implemented. Now, there's already a requirement in the Food Standards Code for food handlers to have skills and knowledge in food safety and hygiene. So this new requirement is really an extension of that and strengthening that by requiring people to have training. It applies to all food handlers that are handling unpackaged, high-risk, ready-to-eat foods. They need to have either completed a food safety training course, or there's an alternative way of complying, and that is to have skills and knowledge of food safety and hygiene matters that are relevant to their specific food handling activities. Now, these requirements must be met before they start to handle food. That is from the 8th of December this year. So anyone who's handling high-risk foods, so examples would be cooking meals, wrapping or packing high-risk foods, making sandwiches. You could be even washing or chopping vegetables or making juices, dishing up food from a bain-marie, for example. All of those activities would be captured, and anyone doing those would need to have their food handler training. There might be some lower risk activities that wouldn't be captured. So if you were only handling packaged foods, maybe someone that was just labelling packaged foods or handling lower risk foods such as crackers and bread rolls, or perhaps making biscuits, they wouldn't need to have the training. Now, like I say, there is that requirement for training to be done before they start handling food. So I'll just discuss a bit more about the training options. So the new standard requires that training has these 4 components that are given in the green box there on the right. Now, to simplify things, we have provided information on our website to basically direct you to 3 training courses that we are aware of that satisfy these requirements. Now, they can all be done online. So you have Food Safe, I'm Alert, and Do Food Safely. They may have a small fee associated with them, but some local governments do offer them for free, so that you can check with that. They can be, like I say, they're completed online. They will take approximately an hour or so to complete. At the end of that, you will be given a certificate. And there is no specific requirement in the new standard to renew the course, but it's important that food handlers have skills and knowledge. So a refresher may be necessary at some point, but it's really on a case-by-case basis. Now, like I mentioned before, there is an alternative to demonstrating compliance with this standard, and that is having skills and knowledge in food safety and hygiene. And so it might be possible for an individual to have had prior learning, such as in a previous food handling employment, or even learn on the job, learn how to handle the food safely on the job, and that can be recognised as well. So if a person does not have the skills and knowledge in food safety, or is not able to complete the training before they start handling food, there are other tasks they could do, like handling low-risk foods, or maybe just taking orders or labelling packaged food. But it's important that either the training or obtaining the skills and knowledge is done by the 8th of December and before the individual starts handling high-risk foods. Okay, on to food safety supervisors. Now this, again, a food safety supervisor must be appointed by the 8th of December this year. Now, the role of the food safety supervisor is to really oversee the food handling operations and to make sure that everyone is handling their food safely. They will also have a role to identify and prevent and manage any food safety issues occurring in the food business. They can share their skills and knowledge with the food handlers and just promote that positive food safety culture within the food business to make sure everyone knows what they should be doing and that the food you're producing is safe to eat. Now, a food safety supervisor needs to have obtained qualification. So they need to do some training and obtain a certificate that must be done within the last 5 years. They need to also be given the authority and have the ability to manage and give direction on the safe food handling, and must be reasonably available to advise and supervise each food handler that's handling the high risk foods. So I will go into each of those 3 requirements in more detail now. Starting with the training requirements. So the food safety supervisor training needs to be undertaken by an approved training course that's delivered by a registered training organisation. Now, there are certain units of training that have been deemed to satisfy this requirement, and we've listed them on our webpage, which is given here on this slide. And then we have 2 screenshots here, so you'll see that we have the units of competencies, but to simplify things, we've also listed some of the WA-based training organisations and whether they offer the training in person or online. There are more as well, so you can search for more. There are listings in the New South Wales Food Authority's website, which we have a link to on that page as well for more courses. And the course would generally cost for an online course approximately, well, I think the cheapest would be around about $100 up to $180 for the online course, but you should check that with the training provider. And again, they generally take between 8 to 12 hours to complete, but again, that needs to be checked with the training provider. Those online ones are self-paced, so you can come back to it, sort of do sections of it and come back to it when you can. Some of them also provide in-person training as well, if that's preferred. The training must have been completed within the last 5 years, and there is a requirement in the standard for the training to be refreshed every 5 years as well. That can either be through repeating the course again, or some of the training organisations do also offer refresher courses, and you'll be issued with a certificate once you complete the training, and the food safety supervisor needs to have that certificate available should an authorised officer, so that's an environmental health officer, should they ask to view that, so that they can check and see that you've satisfied that requirement. The other requirement then for the food safety supervisor is to be reasonably available. That means that they should be there whilst food is being handled most of the time. It's okay for them to be away for short periods of time. For example, if they're having a short break or running a quick errand, that's fine. There are ways to manage that. So, you know, ideally they'd be contactable by phone. It's also okay for the food safety supervisor to have short periods of leave as well. The Food Standards Australia and New Zealand have provided guidance on it, and they suggest that up to 30 days of leave is fine. There are ways, again, to manage food safety during that time, and it's important that the staff that are continuing to work are aware, you know, of appropriately trained in food handling, obviously, but know how to handle the food safely, and, you know, for example, having procedures in place for them to follow would help to manage the risks whilst the food safety supervisor is away. If there are longer periods of leave, then it really would be necessary for another supervisor to be appointed during that time. The food safety supervisor also needs to be in a position where they have authority and the ability to manage and give direction. So it really should be someone who is working there most of the time and someone who is across most of the food handling activities. So this would typically be like the main chef or cook or the kitchen supervisor. And now we're on to showing that your food is safe.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. So this is the third tool that has been introduced in this new standards. Is that the food business will need to be able to show that the food that they produce is safe. And how do you do that? Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. So the simplest way to do so is that the food business must make a record of important food safety controls, activities, and processes. Okay, that is the fastest way to show that you have those controls in place and the activities is well monitored and that the important processes has been undertaken. And these records must be kept for 3 months. So what that means is that the health officer, when they rock up at the canteen or food business, they will ask you for your records of your food safety controls, and you need to be able to show that you have been keeping them for at least 3 months. And the other way to fulfill this requirement in the standards, instead of making a record, is to demonstrate to the reasonable satisfaction of an authorized officer that food is being handled safely. So I'll discuss these two components in separate details. So firstly, you're going to talk about further what a record is. So a record can be something very formal, like if you've got a hard copy form, you're making a record of a temperature or what time you receive the food and the temperature when you receive it. Or if you take a temperature recording of your food and you note it down on a form, that is a common record that we see. And if you've got a shiny new system where you collect your information online or electronically via an app, that is also a record. But something as simple as making notes on an invoice when you receive your grocery, for example, where Woolworths deliver your grocery to Canteen. On the invoice, you make a record of the temperature recording that you've taken of that delivery and note it down on the invoice. That also constitutes as a record. Other forms of record are likened to recipes that you have or validated work instruction. or standard operating procedures. So that is also a record to show that you have a system in place, and you can also have a record of the staff that has been trained to undertake those work instructions or to make the food according to that recipe. Other forms of records also includes data loggers. This mostly in bigger food businesses where they have automatic temperature of the thermometers in their storage equipment, and that automatically links up with the phone. And that also constitutes as a formal record, and that can be shown to the health officer during the audit. Photos and videos are also a form of records. Generally, the general principle is that the record is can be in any form that where the information is captured and can be reproduced, and needs to be kept for at least 3 months according to these new standards. So with the second compliance pathway, if you're not going to make a record, the health officer during the inspection will quiz you or might ask you to demonstrate the compliance with the prescribed provisions, which I'm going to talk about a bit later. So this can include you physically demonstrating an activity on how you make the food, or he might walk through with the food handler in terms of following the work instruction that has been formally recorded. And if you opt to use a time control rather than temperature control, you will need to demonstrate how that's going to happen. And the officer will quiz you on it, and you need to be able to demonstrate to their reasonable satisfaction that the control is actually in place. So what records do you need to make? So in the standards, there are prescribed provisions which outlines what controls that you need to make record of. So it is lifted off standard 3.2.2. You might be familiar with this if you're already being assessed by the local government. It is the other standards which stipulates the food handling requirements. So under clause 5, part 3, temperature during food receipt. So again, when you receive food from either delivery or a contractor sending food in, you need to take a temperature of it to validate that it's within range. And also, if you store food on site, again, you need to make a record of your storage equipment to make sure that it is either below 5 degrees or above 60 degrees if you're hot holding. And if you are processing food or making food, and it's a high-risk food that you're dealing with a very complex procedure, mostly not so much applicable to canteens, but a common example for food businesses is you making your own raw egg mayo. I don't think school canteens will have time for that, but if you do, there are specific steps and controls that you need to make record of. Again, the other prescribed provision is to show that you minimize the time during food processing that the food is outside temperature control. That is more than 5 degrees and less than 60 degrees, where the temperature range where bacteria can grow. And you need to be able to show that you're minimizing the time that the ingredients and the food is within that range. If you are cooling food or cook and chilling for reheating later on or next day, you will need to show that through your records that you're cooling the food fast enough according to standards 3.2.2. Again, reheating food, you need to show that your processors on site reheats the food fast enough and not just sticking it into the bain-marie early in the morning and hopefully that by lunchtime it's hot enough. So that wouldn't meet that requirement under 3.2.2. So if you're reheating food, you need to either make a record to show that it's heated fast enough, or you can show the health officer how that is being undertaken at the canteen. So temperature control during food display. So again, if you've got bain-marie on site, you need to have the record to show that the temperature is being kept throughout the day. If food is being transported to another premises, so most probably not so relevant for canteen, but if you are receiving food, that will be the first prescribed provision. But if it is a facility where you manufacture food and then deliver it to another food premises, you also need to have maintained records to show that the temperature is controlled and maintained during the transport of that food. And lastly, with the cleaning and sanitizing, you can easily make a checklist on which equipment or which part of the facility has been cleaned and sanitized, or alternatively, you can have a work procedure or standard operating procedure and show that your staff have been trained to implement those procedures. So that's just a very quick snapshot of the types of records that you'll be expected to keep, and the health officer will be looking for when they conduct their food safety assessment. So there are further resources that we have developed. For one is the Food Safety Management Tool Guide for food businesses. So that's available on our website and also available in other languages. So with the examples that I've quoted earlier with the record keeping, there's more information in there on the other options and alternatives that is available to food businesses. And on the website, we do have further information as well, and we will update our resources there as we continue to implement these new standards across the state and in the lead up to December. And if you would like more comprehensive information, we do have the Safe Food Australia Guide produced by Fazans. It's quite a thick document, it's a few hundred pages long, but if you're interested in the nitty-gritty and the technical details on the compliance with not only with the new standards, but with 3.2.2 and 3.2.3, this is a very good resource, and I highly recommend it. And there's plenty of resource in there, and it will give you a better understanding on what compliance look like for these 3 new standards. On the Food Standards website as well, there are templates available. And again, with the templates, you do need to make it relevant to your food activities. So I understand that some food training courses will provide you templates. Again, you need to revise or revisit those templates to see that if it's appropriate and relevant to the food activities, the food producing activities that you undertake on site. Okay, just to highlight another set of resource that we've developed a long time ago. This is the resource for food businesses. So these are posters and stickers that you can order through your local government. And it's a very good resource to post up on your school canteen just to remind your food handlers of the safe food handling behaviors or safe food handling practices that they should have. Okay, so that's it from me. I'll just stop my share screen now. Happy to take any questions now or after Megan's view on the support that you'll be getting.
Sure. I think there's a few things that we can address now, and Amanda has been madly replying to some of the questions, but there's a couple that I feel would be good to clarify from your perspective. So just going back up to the top. In regards to food safety training, so food safe is what WASCA recommends. There's a question about, does this include volunteers? And the short answer is yes. And that's from WASCA's perspective, the Department of Education's Healthy Food and Drink perspective, as well as this standard that's just been talked about. But I think it's really important, the comment that you made towards the end, Rebecca, was making sure that you've got the skills and knowledge to prepare food safely. If you have a volunteer, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you've got a volunteer that knocks on your door and says, I want to volunteer today, but I haven't done any food safety training, you still welcome them in because you don't want to scare them off, and you give them non-food prep jobs to help. Is that correct?
That's correct, absolutely. And that's where also the standard gives you flexibility, because it not only has, there's the 2 options there the one is doing the actual training, and the alternative is, you know, an individual might already have the skills and knowledge if they've already worked in a restaurant or you know, have experience. So yeah, you could get them to come in and do food handling that is low risk. So they could be, I'm not all that familiar with everything that you do, but maybe just, you know, serving, like handling packaged foods, putting labels on things. So as long as they're not directly handling the high risk foods, then that's fine. And then, you know, that could perhaps give them time to then obtain those skills and knowledge so they can, you know, either do the course or learn what they need to know for their specific food handling activities. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there was a follow-up question to that. So by the 8th of December, volunteers must complete food handler training. Yes. So you've got some time to get them trained. WASCA still offers free access. I'm going to talk about that in a moment, to food safe training. Does the supervisor have to be present at all times? And then you very soon after that clarified that no, they don't, but it's generally going to be the canteen supervisor or the canteen manager who becomes your food safety supervisor, because there won't, in my mind, there won't be anybody else who's in the canteen as often or responsible for record keeping or responsible for the training. So you don't have to be there at all times. And then there was the example of taking breaks plus up to 30 days of leave. So that was very quickly covered after that question was posed. Is there anything else, Rebecca?
One thing to add to that, yeah, is that they don't have to be, you don't have to have a food safety supervisor present when you're doing low risk things. So like if you're just cleaning or doing low risk food prep, they only need to be there for the higher risk activities. So handling your potentially hazardous foods, yeah.
Right. I think, Henry, this next question was when you had the how to demonstrate food is safe. Does paragraph 10b apply to the transport of ingredients, for example, from the supermarket to the canteen? So before you answer that one, I want to clarify that it's not a recommended practice that you're shopping in a supermarket. We would much rather you be getting all of your goods delivered to the canteen, and there's multiple reasons for that. It's not just a food safety concern, but in reality, we know that it does happen. So do you want to clarify that, Henry?
Yeah, sure. So yes, the answer to that is yes. Temperature control should be maintained during the transport between the supermarket and your canteen. But there is a leeway and there is an option under 3.2.2 where you can use the time control as one of the controls to demonstrate compliance. So if you're not familiar with the 2 and 4 hour rule, now's a good time to get a good understanding of it. There's a very good guide from Fazan's on that. I do highly recommend that you familiarize yourself with it. So in the gist of it is that the potentially hazardous food, if it's outside temperature control for 2 hours, you can refrigerate it again. But as soon as cumulatively it's outside outside temperature control for 4 hours or more, it needs to be discarded and is considered unsafe. So you can factor that into your transport logistics, and do bear in mind again, it is a cumulative time outside temperature control. So again, there's the resources there. You can refer to it to familiarize yourself on how the 2 and 4 hour rule works.
Yeah, and from a really practical point of view, Amanda has replied to that comment as well, saying that be prepared and pack a cooler bag or an esky with some ice bricks in your car, so that when you're doing that transport back to the canteen, it is actually at a good temperature. If our workers have completed food safe multiple choice questionnaire, is that enough? So I'm assuming they don't do the training, but you're going to sit with them and do the questionnaire, but that's it. In my mind, no, but I'll leave it up to you guys to answer.
Yeah, I mean, they should, to complete the training, they should really complete it and have the certificate to sort of, yeah, satisfy that requirement. Yeah.
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 And also, when we say demonstrate requirements, it is to the health officer. So if you don't have the certificate to show that you have the skills and knowledge, the health officer might quiz you and ask you to demonstrate and show that you have the skills and knowledge to do that, to handle those potentially hazardous food. So the quickest way is just to do the course and get yourself ready.
Right. Can you clarify what low risk food prep is? And I think, Rebecca, you did just do that by talking about non-food prep related things. So whether they're doing labelling, sorting orders, all of those things. And then what's an example of a low risk food prep?
Maybe making biscuits. So they're, if it's something that doesn't need to be kept in the fridge once it's made. To be honest, there's probably not so many of those activities in reality. I think the majority of your food handling is going to be your high risk, potentially hazardous foods. But yeah, or it could be just putting out food that's already packaged on display. But yeah, like I said, I think most things are most likely to be high risk.
Okay. There are 3 of us who all work part-time with little overlap. So in this case, do we all need to be supervisors? We get deliveries when we're not. Maybe answer that one question first and then I'll go on to the next one.
It comes down to the definition of readily available. So if you've got a school canteen with 3 part-time staff, which is or more than 1 part-time staff, which is quite common in some PNCs and schools, you will need to ideally have at least one food safety supervisor, and that nominated food safety supervisor will need to be contactable when the food is being made on site. So how that will look like in compliance wise, let's say your nominated food safety supervisor is not on duty on the day, health officer rocks up and they will try and validate that your food safety supervisor is contactable. He might pick up a phone and call your nominated food safety supervisor, and they need to be contactable. So that would deem to satisfy that requirement. But coming back to the intent, because a food safety supervisor course is a lot more comprehensive than food safe, the idea is that the supervisor will be able to provide guidance and advice to the food handlers on the safe food handling practices. So so if having one food safety supervisor is able to achieve that in the school canteen setup for your school, then that's fine. But if you feel that more than one needs to be trained up, then that's something to be considered.
Okay. We get deliveries when we're not present. How should we monitor the temperature? So an example of this would be a milk delivery comes half an hour before the canteen staff arrive. Not great practice to begin with, but it does happen. And I know that you can try and request that doesn't happen, but a delivery driver has their route that they need to take. So how would you suggest that temperature is monitored in that scenario?
Bit tricky. I guess that it depends on if you have a record on when that delivery has been dropped off. Most of the time, it wouldn't be in a chilled bag, from what I understand. So you will need to take note of the delivery time and apply the 2 and 4 hour rule if that's the case, if you've got no control over the temperature, the food receipt time. Like you say, it's not ideal. Mostly it's an arrangement that you can work out with delivery or include a comment on the note, your order.
And I guess just checking the temperature as soon as you do get there and you do see the goods, checking that temperature and making sure that it's, well, hopefully still within the temperature zone, or really trying to stop that process. Yeah.
Or
it's tricky.
refrigerating it immediately when you receive it and only taking it out for handling once you're ready to handle that food.
Yeah. I will share my screen and keep moving on, but please keep using the chat function. Just make sure I can bring this up. Okay, so what's WASCA's role in all of this? The first one is communication. So exactly like what we're doing today, helping to disseminate the information to schools and making sure that everyone's really informed about what the requirements are. An advisory service, so WASCA members can call and email us anytime to chat to our team. There'll be links on the WASCA website to tools, resources and training. That section of our website is already populated and we will continue to populate that over the next few months. Food safe food handler training is essential. This has been part of the Department of Education's Healthy Food and Drink policy since 2007. So this isn't new news to most of our schools. It is a requirement for all paid and volunteer staff to complete that. There are other food safety training that's available that has been mentioned already today. The reason we recommend Food Safe is because it's more comprehensive and you get some really great templates as part of doing that training, which is really valuable for the canteen. WASCA members get to access that training for free via WASCA. It's normally $35, or some local councils do provide free access as well. In the past, we've offered face-to-face and video conference training. It's a really valuable way to do the training because you get the networking with other people in the room. We don't currently have any scheduled, but if that's something that schools want us to start offering again, then we're really happy to consider that. Okay, good news. We are going to be offering accredited food safety supervisor training. It's not available yet, it's under development. We're not an RTO, we're not a registered training organisation, but we're working in partnership with a registered training organisation who have already been delivering this training for many years to school canteens. It includes the 2 units of competencies that are required. It's customised to school canteens. So that means that our scenarios and our case studies will be really relatable to school canteens. It'll be face-to-face only in the East Perth office, in our East Perth office to begin with. But we recognise that that's not available to regional schools. There's other training providers that we've already heard about. I'm going to talk about a couple more in a moment. And starting with face-to-face delivery. Amanda and I actually completed the course virtually today through another training provider, and it's good virtually, but it just doesn't replace that face-to-face interaction. So that's why we're starting in that way. It'll be a full day from approximately 8:30 to 4:30. All coursework and assessment is completed on the day, and we are offering a subsidised price for WASCA members. Course fees include all training materials, morning tea and lunch. When you look at our training fee is higher than others, and we're a small not-for-profit non-government organisation. We have to cover our costs, but you do everything within that 8 hours that you're with us, you'll be completed. And then there's one piece of paperwork to come back to us, and then we send out your certificate after it's been, all the course content has been assessed by the RTO. And our course is customised to school canteens. There's another provider that we looked at that offers the exact same course, but it's 2 days face-to-face. So you're looking at 12 hours with that provider. And what we've included is an estimate of wages. So if you're taking the day off work out of your canteen, but you're still going to be paid your wages to come, hopefully, then we've estimated that at just $25 an hour for 8 hours, or for that second provider, it's 12 hours. So our cost is slightly higher, but you can see the benefits of what we would be offering. Or a fully online self-paced, self-directed learning is a much cheaper option with 11 hours estimated. You need to do that coursework as well as the assessments, and the assessments you've got to do within your own time and have someone sign off that you've done those assessments. And then resubmit those to the training provider, and then they will mark it and send you your certificate. Most of those training providers say that you've got between 6 to 12 months to complete those assessments. My advice would be do them as soon as possible and get that done, because it's very easy to just put that off, but you want to do it when all the information is fresh. WASCA can't train everybody. There is around 800 school canteens in WA. So we're going to be offering a range of training sessions, but there's just no way we can reach everyone. And you need to make a decision what's going to suit you as a personal learner and your learning style, as well as your commitment of time, your availability. And our course isn't available yet. So our course won't be available until July, whereas you could turn around tomorrow and you could start doing some of these online courses or other courses that have dates available straight away. So you really need to weigh that up for what's going to suit you and your school. At the end of today, we will be sending you out an email to say thanks for coming, and a really short survey. There's 4 questions in it, and one of those questions says, how likely are you to do the WASCA training? We feel like our training course is going to be really valuable to school canteens, but maybe there's other options that you would think would be better suited to you. So please fill in that survey and let us know. But keep using the chat function. We've still got just under 10 minutes to talk about anything that you'd like to, any further questions or comments. And I will throw back to Henry and Rebecca as well. Is there anything else you'd like to add at this point, or questions that you'd like to pose to our members as well?
Not really. So, but in any case, if you do need that additional support, or if there's anything that you're not sure of, your local government health officer would be able to help you. So they have a plan to make contact with all their food businesses between now and then, and to engage with them and to gear them up for the before the standards come into effect. So that will be a good resource to tap onto, but also we've got plenty of resources on our website as well that you can refer to. But in any case, do reach out and get in contact with us if you've got any problems or any questions.
Great, thank you. And your EHO, your local council EHO, is a really great resource for you. Don't be scared to contact them and seek their guidance, because that's what they're there for. They don't want anybody not to have safe food environments. They want to help you achieve these things. 2 comments, one that came up earlier around the category 1 versus category 2 food businesses and those requirements. I just want to reiterate that based on all the canteens that I've been in and all the menus that I've looked at, the vast majority of you are already going to be a category 1. If you think you've got something on, if you think about your menu and you've got cheesies, which is bread and cheese, yogurt, fruit muffins that you make that have an egg in it, and sandwiches with salad, you're a category 1. So it's very few canteen menus these days that I can think of that would actually fit under that category 2. Remembering that with category 2, you still have to do food safe, so your food safety training, you still have to appoint a food safety supervisor. It's your record keeping and your demonstrating of how you comply. That's the thing that varies. Just a clarification, if we have pre-packaged foods delivered to the school and we have volunteers just distribute it only, should they still do the training?
No, that's not required. If it's pre-packaged and they're not handling the food, then it's not the high risk activities that this specific standard is targeting. So it doesn't apply. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? I think it's really fantastic that so many of you have joined us today. Preparing safe food for our kids is really important, and so many of our canteens have already done food safe training and are already well on the way to making sure that they implement these standards. And just to give you an example, so like I said, Amanda and I did the training. This was my workbook today. I don't know if you're going to be able to see that with my background on, maybe not. Oh, there we go. See my highlighting and all my notes? It was like being back at school, but even, I mean, I've delivered food safe training and even I was learning things today, which was really great. And also just clarified a few things of what I've been checking in canteens over the years is actually correct, and canteens are doing a really good job. The one last point about the training that I would point out is when you're going to other providers who provide the training, even though it's generic, make sure you ask your questions. Make sure that you're really voicing any of your concerns or customizing your scenarios to suit the type of food that you offer and the type of service that you provide in your school environment. Don't be afraid to sit there and not ask those questions, because you want to walk out of there feeling really comfortable and confident to implement the strategies that they talk about. Amazing. Well, I don't think there's any more comments or questions. We will be developing a frequently asked question sheet to help to clarify some of these things. Lots of links on our websites. We will be making the recording available. So please share that with anybody else who's interested, and just keep in touch. If you finish today and you think, oh God, what did they say about that? Either contact us, contact your local environmental health officer, and we will keep helping you. Have a great evening. Thank you again. And thank you so much to Henry and Rebecca for joining us. That was invaluable having your input.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
See you.
Thanks.